Hello! Welcome to All A+ Essays, the best among the best. My name is Julie and I will be your instructor as we read through asylum seekers and refugees. The article source is embedded in the video description below. Feel free to read along. Please note that you can get a custom, plagiarism-free essay for as little as $10 a page at All A+ Essays. The link is in the description. Chapter 1 Introduction. This dissertation focuses on the service network for asylum seekers and refugees and the way in which they promote integration into the local community. The term migrant is often used generally. However, for this research it is important to distinguish the different categories that migrants fall into, as the reasons for migration vary. A legal immigrant is someone who is free to enter, work and settle in a country without any restrictions. Block 2008. In contrast to this, the term illegal immigrant could apply to those who have entered a country illegally, without permission from an immigration officer. UNHCR 2008. Economic migrant is another term to separate migrants from refugees and asylum seekers. This term, economic migrant, is used to describe people who leave their country of origin in search of work. They voluntarily choose to leave their home county and can return when they wish to. UNHCR 2008. It is certainly not a new term. After the Black Death of 1348, nearly one-third of the population was wiped out. This produced a gap in the labor market that immigrants were eager to fill. Winder 2005. More recently, large numbers of economic migrants arrived in Britain in 1945 due to another severe shortage of labor following the Second World War. McDowell 2003. The terms asylum seekers and refugees are often used interchangeably by the media, giving the impression that they mean the same thing. However, officially, there is a distinct difference between the two terms. A common definition used for the term asylum seeker is a person seeking refuge in a nation other than his or her own. OED 2007. The important word in this definition is seeking, as they have not yet been granted the right to remain in the country where they have claimed asylum. Luter et al. 2008 write that, according to the law, when an individual arrives in the UK, without permission from an immigration officer, they are an asylum seeker. They submit an application for asylum and once that is accepted then they become a refugee. Originally asylum seeker meant spontaneous refugee and it was first used after the influx of Tamil refugees in Europe during 1984, Robinson et al. 2003. In the USA, asylum seekers and refugees were first seen as people fleeing from communism, welcomed from behind the Iron Curtain. Cohen, 1994. Johnson et al. 2000, write that refugees are displaced people who are unable or unwilling to return to their homeland because they are facing persecutions for reasons such as race, religion or nationality differences. It is important to note that these definitions are not always used in this way, as different combinations are often employed depending on personal preferences and perceptions. A number of researchers converse with some asylum seekers and refugees who took on a range of titles acknowledging both their legal title and their personal perspectives. Sales, 2002, reports that the terms have developed into new social categories. These terms label asylum seekers as undeserving compared to the term refugee, describing people as deserving of entry into Britain and support. This may have been brought about by the media during the 1990s. An increasing number of articles were being published in the daily newspapers on the rising numbers of asylum seekers, labeling them as economic migrants, as people in search of an improved standard of living, rather than someone who has fled their home due to persecution. Thus, a distinction between genuine and bogus asylum seeker was brought to the headlines. Robinson 1995. In contrast to this, refugee has also been a term used to describe people that are going through all different stages of the asylum application process, accepted or refused. Burnett and Peel, 2001. For the purpose of this report, the term set out by Luter et al. 2008 will be used. Refugees are those who have been granted status by the Home Office and asylum seekers are those who have applied and are in the process of waiting for a decision. It is difficult to find exact statistics of the numbers of asylum seekers and refugees around the world as many cases go undocumented. However, 1.1 shows the global trend of refugees calculated by the UNHCR, 2009, resulting in a total of 10,478,600 refugees worldwide at the end of 2008. The UNHCR's 2009 report reveals that by the end of 2008, developing countries hosted 80% of the worldwide asylum-seeking and refugee population, as it is often the case that asylum seekers flee to the nearest safe country for refuge. The slight increase in refugees within Europe at the end of 2008 highlights the 16,000 people who fled Kosovo whose status changed from internally displaced people, someone who has been forced to flee their home due to armed conflict, violence, violation of human rights, natural or human disaster who have not crossed the state border, throughout 2004, to refugees during that time. In contrast to Europe's fourth position for the number of refugees settled there, it still remains the primary destination for asylum seekers, 1.1. On a global scale, there were 838,900 applications made for asylum. In all major regions, the number of positive decisions has gone up, except in Europe where strict asylum policies result in many rejected applications. UNHCR 2009 1.2 shows how the strict policies introduced in the UK affected the Home Office decisions on who was granted asylum and who was refused. From 2001, the number of applicants the UK received steadily decreased to 2005. Due to these strict policies, Europe has been labeled Fortress Europe. Albrecht, 2002, writes that Fortress Europe came about as the first plans were made for a common EU immigration policy, which called for harsher border controls to prevent illegal immigrants without visas from entering into the EU member states unlawfully. This became an important issue with the enlargement of the EU in 2004. The new states were responsible for policing the eastern border of the EU, therefore they were put under considerable pressure to control illegal immigration from the east, throughout 2003. Despite these strict immigration policies, the UK received 25,930 applications for asylum in 2008, ICAR 2009. Within the UK, the migrant population is highly concentrated in London and the southeast of England in areas of relative prosperity and relative deprivation, Glover et al. 2001. To relieve the pressure of the densely populated asylum seekers and refugee population in London, the 1999 Immigration and Asylum Act was created to disperse asylum seekers across the UK. Stevens 2001, 1.1. The study site. The study was conducted in the city of Plymouth. Plymouth is located on the south coast of Devon, in the southwest of England, c. 1.3. The 2001 census showed that the population of the city was approximately 240,700, DCC. 2009. The reason that Plymouth was chosen for this study was that in 1999 Plymouth was selected to be a dispersal city under the 1999 Immigration and Asylum Act. This act disperses asylum seekers to towns and cities around the country and moves asylum seekers away from London, where most would probably prefer to settle. Stevens 2001. Although the southwest of England does not have a large community of refugees and asylum seekers compared to other parts of the UK, there are significant and growing numbers of people being dispersed to the southwest under the 1999 Immigration and Asylum Act, SWC 2009. Before this, compared to the southeast of England, the West Country saw few asylum seekers and refugees. Since then, the ethnic diversity of Plymouth has broadened greatly. Cunliffe and Beharity, 2006, explained that there are now over 25 native languages, other than English, spoken, and the main countries of origin of people dispersed to Plymouth include Iraq, Iran, Angola, Sudan, Congo DRC and Afghanistan. The study seeks to highlight the importance of service networks in supporting asylum seekers and refugees in dispersal cities and the ways in which they work to encourage integration into the local community. By looking at service users who make use of the service network in Plymouth, the research aims to be of relevance to other dispersal cities across the UK that have some concern with issues of integration for asylum seekers and refugees. 1.2 Aim and Objectives. The main aim of this dissertation is to investigate how successful Plymouth Service Network has been in helping refugees and asylum seekers integrate into the community. To reach this aim, objectives set are to research when asylum seekers and refugees began to come into the city, creating a need for a service network to research the urban geography of Plymouth, The variety of services within the city center and the help they provide for asylum seekers and refugees to research the extent of the integration of asylum seekers and refugees and the attitudes of the local population. Chapter 2 Literature Review Traditional approaches to the geographic analysis of refugees and asylum seekers have been focused on specific case studies of refugee emergencies, looking at space in borders, concrete divisions rather than taking into account the social aspect of the lives of refugees and asylum seekers. White 2002. As shown in 2.1, there are a number of ways for a geographer to approach the topic of asylum seekers and refugees. A broader understanding of the subject can be gained by using the research collected from a range of geographical fields. Hinman, 1999, describes that by studying refugees and asylum seekers in a geopolitical context, geographical dimension is lost. The gap between political and cultural geography needs to be bridged. Healy's article, 2006, looks at population geography alongside social theory when studying the experiences of refugees and asylum seekers in the UK. Population geography involves studying the size, composition, fertility, mortality and migration of a population, and how those affect economic development, ecological change and social issues. Bailey 2005. In addition to this, asylum seekers and refugees also fall under the category of social geography, as groups within society. Valentine, 2001, explains that one person can hold more than one identity. Their lives are able to cross separate lines of difference, boundaries and social statuses at the same time. Asylum seekers and refugees experience constraints and deprivations as they are restricted in the amount of choice they have compared to others. This links to White's study, 2002, within political geography, as it is changing refugee and asylum law that leads to such deprivations. As a result of this, asylum seekers and refugees can face the problem of social exclusion, studied by Mohan, 2003, within the field of urban geography. Historically, the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees, which was the main legal document defining a refugee and their rights, had been called for due to the aftermath of the Second World War, which left thousands of refugees wandering across Europe. Wilkinson 2001. Someone was only officially a refugee if their status was recognized by this convention. Only then were they able to work and claim benefits. At that time there was a need to recover the labor shortages in most European countries. Therefore refugees were recruited into schemes and resettled to fill the vacancies. For example, Britain's European Volunteer Workers Scheme. Robinson 1995. Since then, there have been a number of developments in immigration and asylum legislation. These are shown in Table 2.1 from 1951 to 1999. As shown in 2.2, in the years between 1996 and 1999, the number of asylum applications made within the UK increased from 30,000 to 70,000 applicants. One reason for this rapid increase may be a result of the Yugoslavian War, 1992 to 1995, which created 550,000 refugees in Europe, UNHCR 1999. Before 1999, refugee emergencies were dealt with as they happened, that is, specific responses as a reaction to specific global disasters. For example, programs were established for Ugandan Asians in 1972, for Vietnamese during the 1970s and 1980s, and Bosnians and Kosovans in the late 1990s, Sim and Baus 2007. The voluntary not-for-profit sector and charities would often provide the funding needed for these operations with an emphasis on the local community. As the number of applicants had risen so quickly, this brought about the creation of the 1999 Immigration and Asylum Act. In 1999, immigration and asylum legislation changed drastically with the introduction of the 1999 Immigration and Asylum Act. This aimed to address the weaknesses of the asylum system by introducing new centralized support for destitute asylum seekers through National Asylum Support Service, NAS, and by discouraging economic migrants into the UK via the provision of minimal levels of monetary support for asylum seekers, AC 2000. The extent of support includes accommodation, only if necessary, vouchers and some cash, £10 per person per week, and support which is the equivalent to 70% of income support rates, Stevens 2001. In addition to this, and following intense lobbying by local authorities, is the attempt to relieve the pressure on the southeast of England by moving asylum seekers to dispersal cities throughout the UK without giving them any choice of where to go. Robinson et al. 2003. After the changes made in 1999, legislation continued to be tightened in an attempt to deter asylum seekers to the UK. See Table 2.2. The acts introduced after 1999 greatly impacted the number of asylum applications as shown in 2.2. The applications dropped from 80,000 in 2002 to 24,000 in 2007 as it has become harder for asylum seekers to gain refugee status. The reason that genuine asylum seekers come to the UK is to escape political persecution they face in their home country. This could include massacres, detention, beatings and torture, rape, witnessing death squads, political repression, deprivation of human rights, and harassment. Burnett and Peel 2001. Of those who claimed asylum in the UK in 2009, the largest number of applications were from countries including, in order of most applicants to least, Zimbabwe, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, Sri Lanka, China, Eritrea, Somalia, Iraq and Nigeria. UNHCR 2009. Hayter, 2001, writes that while it is human nature to want to stay with your families, friends and your culture, the people who leave those situations are desperate to leave countries facing war and repression. Once asylum seekers arrive in the UK, they claim asylum to an immigration officer or at the UK border agency offices. After an initial screening interview, they will be assigned a UK border agency caseworker who will be responsible for the decision of their case. The asylum seeker can then apply for financial support and accommodation through NAS, National Asylum Support Service, Asylum Aid 2010. At this point, asylum seekers are dispersed away from the southeast of England under the 1999 Immigration and Asylum Act to cities they may not have been to before. Service networks aimed at refugees and asylum seekers have offered support, and projects have encouraged new and existing local communities to become involved and mix socially with the asylum seekers dispersed there. Doyle 2003. Small community organizations and voluntary organizations also encourage integration, and they play an essential part in the assimilation of asylum seekers and refugees within the community. Once they have been sent to dispersal cities, services promote social cohesion within the communities. Wren 2007. It was the 1999 Immigration and Asylum Act that was the major catalyst for bringing asylum seekers and refugees to Plymouth. The exact number of refugees in Plymouth constantly fluctuates due to the granting or refusing of applications to remain. However, Cunliffe and Bahari, 2006, estimate that there are in excess of 700. By studying local service providers and the local population in Plymouth city centre, this dissertation will look at the integration of asylum seekers and refugees in Plymouth since their arrival as a result of the enactment of the 1999 Immigration and Asylum Act and the introduction of dispersal cities. What was the point? Why was it necessary? Were there limitations to the existing literature? Chapter 3 Methodologies. For this research, 3 separate methods have been used: semi-structured interviews, participant observation, and qualitative secondary data research known as triangulation. Using multiple research methods strengthens the results and gives a broader variety of answers to the main research questions. Longhurst 2003. I have used this method to gain a deeper and wider understanding of asylum seekers and refugees and to support any limitations in one method with another. 3.1 Semi-structured interviews. Semi-structured interviews were taken with 4 service providers within Plymouth to gather a variation of interactive research gained from others' experiences. Cloak et al. 2004. The aim of the interviews was to find out when asylum seekers and refugees began to arrive in the city, what services the providers offered and how often the services were available. I also asked about the day-to-day lives of asylum seekers in Plymouth and the response of the local community, discussing topics such as integration and hostility. Where appropriate, a dictaphone was used to record the interview, which allowed full concentration on the interview and conversation was able to flow without pausing for note-taking. Valentine 2005. When a dictaphone was not suitable due to refusal by the interviewee, a notebook was used to record the topic discussed during the interview. A non-probability sampling method was used when conducting interviews, and by discussing my research with the participants, a snowball sampling design was used, gaining new context through those already interviewed. Kumar 2005. Once the information was collected, recorded interviews were transcribed and any notes taken were typed in full. The issues and themes within these documents were then coded. Frequent themes then compared and discussed. Due to the nature of the research, it was expected that issues such as racism and discrimination may have arisen, and in those cases the researcher needed to be sensitive and make clear to the participants that if they did not wish to answer any questions they were not obliged to. Valentine 2005. Furthermore, any service users' names mentioned during the interview would remain confidential and reported anonymously. The potential for problems working with a dictaphone due to technical failures was noted. Therefore, notes were also taken to ensure that the information was recorded in some form. 3.2 Ethnographic Research, Participant Observation, START. Placement. The ethnographic research was taken in the form of participant observation whilst volunteering with a service provider in Plymouth. The placement lasted 3 weeks, where I took on a covert role when shadowing members of staff, assisting service users and attending organized events. The aim of this research was to gain some personal experience working with asylum seekers and refugees, in the hope that I would better understand their day-to-day lives in Plymouth and discover what service provisions are available from an insider's point of view. Herbert 2000. A small, discreet notebook was used during the day so as not to make it too obvious when taking notes, as this may have made surrounding participants uncomfortable. What they were doing or saying was being recorded. These accounts were then written up and extended each evening within a field diary, which was kept covering details remembered at the end of the day. Cook 2005. Once the information was collected, it was categorized into different themes and compared to additional data collected through other methods. Using this method of research brings to question the ethics of taking a covert role during participant observation. For this study, I did not tell the service users that I was using my placement for dissertation research. I was accepted as a geography student gaining work experience in the social work sector. The ethics debate this raises is whether a researcher has the right to study areas of social life without the consent of the participants. Covert research has been criticized for being an invasion of privacy and dishonest. O'Reilly 2005. Cook and Krang, 1995, identified that the people being observed are expected to be honest of their thoughts and feelings. The ethical question is whether the researcher should also be true to their thoughts or feelings, which may change the behavior of the observed participant. Whilst on placement at START, I attempted to work to the best of my ability, to work well in the organization and to make a good impression on my colleagues and the service users, as I would have were I not taking part in ethnographical research. I kept my research from them in the situation, as they may have changed their behavior and would not have been as open with me if they knew they were part of a study. To improve the ethics of this research, I ensured that the anonymity of all participants was kept. 3.3 Qualitative Secondary Data Research, Newspaper Archives. Sources to collect data for this dissertation. Newspaper articles were used as a source of information on when refugees and asylum seekers began to arrive in Plymouth. Local newspaper archives of the Evening Herald and the West Country News are held at Plymouth Central Library, Drake Circus. Newspaper articles are of cultural value to this research because they provide an insight into the changes that have taken place within Plymouth. The aim of the newspaper research was to observe the tone of the information that the general public was reading about asylum seekers and refugees. I also noted the dates of the articles, which revealed when the media first noticed asylum seekers and refugees arriving in the city. Plymouth's Library Service online catalog was used to search for relevant articles on asylum seekers and refugees. Where articles were stored on microfilm reels, a microfilm reader was used and relevant articles printed for coding and analysis. Cloak et al. 2004-72 write that a common problem for human geographers interpreting newspaper articles is that bias will be recognized in all but our own favorite outlet. When analyzing the articles, it was vital that all potential biases be taken into account and the information presented was not to be taken as fact. Chapter 4 Data Presentation and Analysis. Through taking interviews with 4 local organizations: Devon and Cornwall Refugee Support Council, DCRSC, Plymouth Access to Housing, PATH, Refugee Action, and Students and Refugees Together, START. participant observation at START and analyzing local newspaper articles. Three main themes became apparent when analyzing the data. These include Plymouth's attitude towards asylum seekers and refugees, asylum seekers and refugees within the city, and the services available within Plymouth for asylum seekers and refugees. The results collected from newspaper articles give examples of the attitude portrayed by the media to the population of Plymouth. It shows what information people are given and in what way. In addition to this, interviews conducted with local agencies have provided relevant quotes, as the members of staff are aware of the general public's attitudes and of incidences of racism that have occurred in Plymouth. Lastly, the ethnographic research taken shows my personal experience of working with asylum seekers and refugees living within the city. 4.1 Plymouth's attitudes towards asylum seekers and refugees. The first question that arose from the topic of asylum seekers and refugees was, what are the attitudes of the local population of Plymouth towards asylum seekers and refugees? The results show that there is a mixed attitude of both hostility to and welcoming of the asylum seekers and refugees since the 1999 Immigration and Asylum Act created dispersal cities. Interviews with service providers. The interviews taken with some service providers in Plymouth give the impression that the asylum seekers and refugees began arriving in Plymouth without prior preparation. Therefore, the locals seemed quick to judge. Although the newspapers did report the predicted effects of the Dispersal Act, one refugee action representative believes that Plymouth City Council had not planned for the arrival of asylum seekers and refugees into the city. As she says, there was no preparation, no forward planning of services, education or social services. They just brought asylum seekers here and they have regularly ever since. Refugee Action, November 16, 2009. Research conducted in other dispersal cities in the UK would suggest that the findings of being underprepared are not limited to Plymouth. In Glasgow, Wren, 2007, found that local service volunteers faced setbacks due to the lack of preparation before the dispersal program was put in place. The local community was unprepared as asylum seekers often arrived without warning. In Peterborough, UK, which became a dispersal town in 2002, the research showed that as the local community was unprepared for the arrival of asylum seekers, there was a widespread, negative public perception of the asylum seekers. In addition to this, local authorities had been wrongly informed of the regulations, which resulted in asylum seekers being sent to the Job Centre to claim benefits they were not eligible for. McCarthy and Cooper, 2009. Since then, many agencies and charities have formed to assist the council with the asylum seeker and refugee community. The START interview participant revealed that Plymouth is a dispersal center with about 500 bed spaces, so there are a lot of people coming into the city. START, November 18, 2009. Overall, this rapid influx of asylum seekers and refugees into Plymouth meant that services were forced to quickly understand and respond to the needs of the asylum seekers and refugees and work out how to accommodate them within the city, and at the same time encourage a more accepting attitude from Plymouth's existing population. Griffiths et al. 2006. The interviews reveal that in some cases the asylum seekers and refugees encountered hostile attitudes. The topic of racism was discussed within the interviews held for this research. The comments made are shown in 4.1. The issue of racism against asylum seekers and refugees can lead to social exclusion from the community. This is linked with a social hierarchy, highlighting those on the margins of society in relation to those in the center. Hopkins, 2006. The social exclusion that asylum seekers and refugees face within dispersal cities has been researched in a study by Spicer, 2008, which focuses on asylum seekers and refugees' sense of place and integration. He reports that NAS accommodation is often situated in urban areas where income is low and there are few immigrants. Within these cities they often suffer from hostility and racist harassment. There are few chances to socialize and few inclusive local services, therefore limiting the opportunities to integrate into the community. The city of Plymouth fits this description of NAS accommodation areas, therefore the service providers attempt to prevent the effects that Spicer portrays. In the START interview, it was said that Social inclusion and social interaction are key aspects of the organization. If you are really isolated, it's hard. We look at that in casework to see if there are specific things that people want to do. If they want to join a group, we try to facilitate that. START November 18, 2009. Asylum seekers and refugees also suffer from the hostility worked into policies and processes against them. This was shown in 4.2. The DCRSC representative describes the process that asylum seekers go through after they have arrived in the UK, and the PATH representative as he described the way in which asylum seekers are treated on their arrival in Plymouth. These examples show how asylum seekers are forced from one city to another, having just arrived in the country. Ethnographic research: asylum seekers and refugees do not have the same access to financial assistance in the UK. For example, asylum seekers are only entitled to 70% of the income support that refugees and UK citizens are given. Refugee Council 2009. In addition, if asylum seekers have nowhere to live on their arrival in the UK, then their only choice is to be placed in NAS accommodation. Asylum seekers in NAS accommodation often face difficulties when dealing with the organization. Applications for a change of location accommodation are not always dealt with sympathetically. 4.2i shows an example where there were differences between the asylum seeker and the landlord. The asylum seeker feared for the safety of her children, so wished to be relocated. In recounting the circumstances for the request for a change in accommodation, the benefit of the doubt was with the landlord, meaning that the asylum seeker was not believed to have a justified cause for complaint. Therefore, NAS was reluctant to move this family. Refugees also suffer from the hostility of the housing system. For many reasons, refugees are often unable to find employment and therefore seek housing benefits to assist with their immediate accommodation needs. However, for refugees, the very system that is intended to help them often causes further difficulties. Whilst it is accepted that there are landlords in the private rental sector that simply will not accept any tenant claiming housing benefit, it would appear to be more widespread in the refugee community. This may be because there are opinions held by some landlords that are detrimental to refugees and are born out of a poor understanding of the issues involved. 4.2e. After receiving council accommodation, all tenants can apply for vouchers up to £200 to assist with furnishing their home. The terms and conditions of this voucher are complicated and have many restrictions on their usage. This means that refugees encounter more difficulties than other recipients. The conditions control not only where the vouchers are redeemed but also the items purchased. The sales staff encountered, there may be only one member of staff trained to deal with these vouchers, and the method of payment. This is not conducted at a normal checkout but at the customer service desk. These conditions make it very difficult for any recipient, but refugees have to overcome additional obstacles such as language barriers, cultural differences, being undermined in their fear of authority, on top of individual traumas they are dealing with. Therefore, they need help just to navigate through the system and its processes and procedures to avoid unintentional non-compliance. 4.2e. Boswell, 2001, writes that as the number of asylum seekers and refugees increase within Europe, there has been a focus on the growing public anxiety about the perceived social and economic costs of assisting those searching for refuge. This can lead to hostility and racial harassment. During the participant observation placement, I had the opportunity to discuss hostile attitudes shown towards asylum seekers and refugees, which led to an asylum seeker telling of a racial incident that she witnessed. She talked of an experience that she had on a bus in Plymouth city centre where a black woman had got onto the bus. Some young boys had started to shout horrible things at her. The service user said she went home and cried as she felt so unwelcome in Plymouth. 20/07/09. Newspaper archive sources. Once Plymouth was selected to be a dispersal city under the 1999 Immigration and Asylum Act, asylum seekers and refugees began to appear more frequently in the local newspaper headlines. In December 1999, newspapers were publishing that the government was planning to disperse 2,500 asylum seekers a month around Britain. By February 2000, the Evening Herald published an article announcing, Plymouth looks set to host more than 300 asylum seekers over the next 11 months, January 2, 2000 p2, informing readers of the government's plan to disperse asylum seekers around the UK. Further articles such as, Council Voices series concern over refugees, April 9, 2001 p1, appeared to be more condescending towards asylum seekers, as it is published that there have been top-level talks between the Council about the suitability of Devonport accommodating a large number of refugees in a confined space, giving the impression that the refugees are not welcome within that community. It is often seen that the media has a large effect on the general public's attitude towards asylum seekers and refugees. This is researched in Lauder et al. 2008 report, which shows that it is often the case that media coverage of asylum seekers and refugees is negative. Research taken by Philo and Beattie, 1999, found that within the British media asylum seekers and refugees were described in the same way as natural disasters, in floods and tidal waves. Using this language automatically creates fear and concern. The local newspapers studied for this research have also printed articles which present negativity when reporting on asylum seeker and refugee news. For example, in the article "Refugee Move is a Disgrace," a councillor is quoted saying, "It seems there is an open-ended agreement to take on these immigrants and they are coming in through the back door." September 13, 2000 p7, portraying hostility towards the asylum seekers and refugees within the city. However, in the same article another councillor is quoted saying this is untrue, cover both sides of the argument. These actions present evidence that there have been hostile attitudes taken towards the asylum seekers and refugees dispersed within Plymouth. In contrast to this, not all attitudes within the media towards the arrival of asylum seekers and refugees have been negative. After the Dispersal Act was introduced, the Evening Herald quoted Plymouth councillor Mike Sheaf saying, "We ourselves have experienced the devastation of war in the past and we should be ready to support those who need our help." January 26, 2000 p7. This article raised awareness of asylum seekers and refugees entering the city and showed clear support from a member of the council. One event that shows Plymouth's support for the multiculturalism within the city is the Respect Festival, shown in S4.3 and 4.4. Plymouth Respect Festival is an event that ran for 2 days within the city centre. Activities such as music, performance and arts took place, and there was plenty of information provided on stalls by agencies that supported multiculturalism within the city. October 26, 2009. The Herald quoted Dr. Naresh Button from Plimpton saying, "The festival is beautiful and I wish events like this happened more often to get people out of the house, mixing together away from the television and seeing how the world really is." October 26, 2009. Sales, 2002, writes that to the hands-off approach of official policy, action is put upon the voluntary sector to promote integration of asylum seekers and refugees into the community. By hosting organized events such as Plymouth Respect Festival, asylum seekers and refugees within the city are helped to relieve social and cultural isolation. By using the major public space within the city centre to host the Respect Festival, an area which is seen as a prime place for bringing locals, minority groups and tourists together, promoting social cohesion, made in up for 2004, 4.2 asylum seekers and refugees in the city nowadays. Plymouth's asylum seekers and refugees often face destitution, have troubles integrating into the community and have to deal with social clustering. Interviews with service providers, one difficulty that asylum seekers and refugees within the city face is destitution. As PATH associate Nick Reed says in 4.5i, asylum seekers and refugees others have to rely on others for help when they find a gap in their payments. This often leads to them turning to the friends they have made for help. Refugee Action spokesperson Jane Robinson explains this in 4.5e. Levels of destitution continue as asylum seekers become an increasing burden on their own unstable communities due to the cashless support system. The unfortunate circumstances for asylum seekers is that they are unable to work their way out of destitution as they are not given the right to work in the UK. Fillmore and Goodson, 2006, write that once receiving refugee status they are legally allowed to work. However, disadvantages such as knowledge of the English language often leave many unemployed. Dand, START, said during her interview that a lot of the industries like food factories that traditionally took on a lot of people through short-term contracts and it was easy for people to get in, often that's people's first job in a new country, have either closed or there aren't a lot down here. 18/11/09, leaving fewer opportunities for the refugees to find employment. This causes integration into society to become more challenging and does nothing to strengthen community cohesion within dispersal cities. Some asylum seekers work illegally to relieve destitution, however. If they are caught, it is likely that they would be deported. Zetter and Pearl 2000. As 4.5i shows that there is some help available for the destitute within Plymouth provided by the services and charities that those in need can be referred to. However, the help provided is rarely money which the asylum seekers and refugees can spend for themselves. In most cases, they must make a separate application for each resource they are in need of. For example, the Red Cross provides support in form of furniture and food vouchers, and Liz Harden says that DCRSC can offer some help. 4.5e. An important part of accommodating asylum seekers and refugees is ensuring that the newcomers are integrated into the community so that they can build lives for themselves in Plymouth. After interviewing service providers within Plymouth, the trend seems to be that many single refugees will leave the city in search of work, or family and refugee families will remain if they have children in school. START representative Susie Dent says that, currently in Plymouth is very difficult to find work. Industries like food factories that traditionally took on a lot of people through short-term contracts have closed, so some people will go because they can't find employment. A lot of people will stay, which is great, particularly families as they have children in schools, but again some families will choose to go because for them their particular community is elsewhere. Maybe they want to join other family members somewhere else, or they want to join a religious community or an ethnic grouping. It's very variable. Corrick, 2003, explains within her article that when measuring integration, occupational mobility and economic status are strong indicators of how well an asylum seeker or refugee has integrated into the community. However, factors such as the quality and strength of their social links within the city are just as important for their personal satisfaction. Once refugees have decided to remain in Plymouth, there are service providers in Plymouth who help to promote community cohesion, which enables all to live peacefully following out their own values and beliefs. Temple and Moran 2005. Hardinge, DCRSC, states that, although people and the media regard Plymouth and the Southwest as a racist area, the service users of DCRSC say that they feel safe and welcome in Plymouth. DCRSC offers them a certain amount of safety and they may feel less vulnerable in Plymouth rather than in large cities. 10/11/09. A natural action when asylum seekers and refugees enter a city is social clustering. However, Plymouth City Council would like to avoid ghetto areas forming. Dent, START, explains the situation to be unpreventable due to the nature of the housing in 4.6i. Once asylum seekers are granted refugee status, they must move out of their NAS accommodation and find a property through private or social housing. Robinson, Refugee Action, has noted that some refugees experience hostility when given social housing in Plymouth. 4.6e. Vaughan's article, 2007, argues that ghettos form through choice. The attraction of immigrant clustering is the available economic, social, religious and cultural support that develops, and to build up a network of support from others arriving in a city which is new to them. Reed, PATH, says that pockets of communities are arising in Plymouth. The Kurdish community is the biggest ethnic community noticeable in Plymouth. There have been events celebrating their culture which have had funding from the local council. He draws attention to areas such as King Street. 4.6e. This small Kurdish community builds a system of support for those included and also helps to preserve traditions and cultures within the social network. AFTAB 2005, in contrast to this, Hardinge, DCRSC, states that certain cultural ghettos have not built up in Plymouth. This is because once the asylum seekers have been granted refugee status, they often go into council housing where they have no choice over where they are located. In addition to this, there are certain areas of Plymouth where asylum seekers and refugees have suffered from racism in the past. This is not acceptable and action can be taken to avoid being housed in such areas. Dent, START, states that there are areas where a number of hate crimes have been reported. If people say that they have been offered housing in an area that we think maybe there have been a lot of racist incidents, we will speak to the police to see if they know about a lot of hate crime in that area. 18/11/09. The service providers will use their expertise to help asylum seekers and refugees integrate into the community as smoothly as possible. The results show two contradicting opinions of social clustering within Plymouth, as this topic is open to an individual's interpretation of the term. Vaughan, 2007, reports a distinct difference between the ghetto scene in the U.S., where 60% of a group's members are in one area, compared with enclaves, which are more commonly seen within the UK as a small concentration of a minority group. Ethnographic research. Whilst on placement, I discussed what it was like living in Plymouth with some of the service users. One asylum seeker spoke about being unhappy with the accommodation she was living in. 4.7i. This shows the troubles that asylum seekers face when placed within NAS accommodation. Zetter and Pearl, 2000, writes that once NAS replaced the previous housing legislation in 2000, asylum seekers were offered accommodation once in a dispersal area. If the asylum seeker refuses this property without a reason deemed appropriate by NAS, then they will not be offered another. Burnett and Peel, 2001, add to this, explaining that if asylum seekers suffered from problems with the property, whether that was racial abuse from neighbors or if they decided that they wanted to be near their family or community and this resulted in an asylum seeker leaving their allocated accommodation, they would then be refused any future public welfare support, meaning that they would have to rely on their friends and families to provide for them. In contrast to this negative feeling towards being placed within NAS accommodation without choice, away from any social networks asylum seekers may have, I found that the young asylum seekers and refugees I met were happy living in Plymouth and felt that it was home. 4.7e. Hiranami, 2008-12, writes that this is often the case with children as they adapt easily to new languages, customs, roles, and opportunities much more quickly than their parents. Newspaper archive sources. There have been movements published in the media that promote the integration of asylum seekers and refugees into the community to prevent them from wanting to leave. Herald reporter, Nick Lester, reports that there has been an action plan launched in the city to support fair treatment of asylum seekers and improve the integration of refugees into the community. June 16, 2004 p6. In April 2003, an 18-month program was launched in Plymouth to improve social cohesion within the city. This was done through celebrating cultures, working towards equality for all, and educating young people, in hope that over time, these small steps towards a more harmonious local environment might well hold the key to a more cohesive and integrated society. Home Office 2004. 4.3 Services available for asylum seekers and refugees in Plymouth. Interviews with service providers. Hardinge, DCRSC, said in her interview that before DCRSC opened in 1999, charities and Christian groups were trying to fit the need for a support service for asylum seekers and refugees within Plymouth, without the necessary expertise in housing or support work. 10/11/09. However, today there are many service providers throughout the city. The four interviewed for this research, DCRSC, PATH, Refugee Action and START, work both independently and together to offer their services to the asylum seekers and refugees in Plymouth. Some of the services these organizations provide include food packages, clothing, use of internet, weekly social meetings, hosting organized events such as football tournaments, cultural celebrations, housing advice, and assistance in applying for asylum and housing funds. They are often open to asylum seekers and refugees 5 days a week. Examples are shown in 4.8. One of the reasons that service providers were called upon was to assist with promoting the integration of the dispersed asylum seekers and refugees into the local community. Griffiths et al.'s 2006 study of refugee community organizations in the West Midlands and Northwest showed that there was a rapid growth of service providers within the cities after they had become dispersal areas. These organizations were in high demand, as evidence showed that 50% of asylum seekers granted refugee status remained within the city they were dispersed to. Reed, PATH, says that the organizations were created to help move asylum seekers and refugees forward into finding accommodation and integrating into society, rather than just to give them status and then push them out the door and then allowing them to sink or swim. 10/11/09. Service providers have a critical role within dispersal cities, handling the transnational flow of migrants. They are accepting of individuals' cultures and identities whilst encouraging the learning of the local economic, social and political environment. 5 et al. 2006. Gamaladina Shalmi et al. 2002, writes that the service providers feel marginal from integration of asylum seekers and refugees into British citizens. They are only there to bridge the gaps between the mainstream agencies and the service users, as often the small organizations do not have funds to run their own education and training programs. 4.9 shows a model of successful integration in society based on 3 factors outlined by Knight et al. 2002. These include basic needs, which represent material factors, human association, which represents relationships and cultural identities, and participation, which represents becoming a citizen. Gamaladina-Shalmi et al. 2002, write that service providers, such as those interviewed for this research, are able to provide some functions in the first 2 stages, such as lunchtime clubs, women's sewing group, and working on cultural identity with playback theater. However, for asylum seekers and refugees within the city to participate as citizens, to have their voices heard and views respected, the service providers should be more involved, rather than be marginalized by mainstream organizations at the participation stage. In the interview with Refugee Action, it was said that where asylum seekers and refugees are unable, the service users advocate on behalf of them in an attempt to have their opinions heard. For example, by writing letters and making phone calls to the border agency or social services. Robinson, Refugee Action, says, although they get somewhere to live and a very small amount of money, there is a lot of advocating for things that they should just be getting. For example, there are gaps in money, and if someone's claim fails, they will have no money and nowhere to live, so we can try to get them support in different ways. If they fit into a certain category, we can make a claim for their case to be opened again. 16/11/09. When discussing integration, the interviewed service providers in Plymouth said that families often remain in Plymouth after receiving the right to remain, as they do not wish for their children to change schools. A lot of them families do stay partly because they have children in schools here. A lot of asylum seekers and refugees are very well educated, so they want their kids to do well, so they wouldn't necessarily move them. Refugee Action, November 16, 2009. Therefore, the service providers promote the integration of asylum seeker and refugee pupils within the local schools. Refugee Action spokesperson, Jane Robinson, explained that they also promoted integration from the locals' point of view. We had funding for a refugee awareness worker that went out and gave presentations within schools. 16/11/09. By educating the children about the lives of asylum seekers and refugees, there is a hope that integration will become a smoother transition in Plymouth. A report by Arnott and Pinson, 2005, suggests that through raising awareness of refugee issues in the citizenship and religious curricular, and by promoting positive images of asylum seekers and refugee pupils within schools, effective integration of the children would be successful. As well as assisting asylum seekers and refugees in integration into the Plymouth community, the service providers also create opportunities for them to socialize with one another. At the DCRSC, there is one volunteer assigned to the position of organizing social events for the ASR. Hardinge says it is his job to plan events such as playing football and going to the gym, and he lets the service users know when there are free events going on to keep them occupied. 10/11/09. Ethnographic Research, Griffiths et al. 2005, 218, write that the aim is to promote the political and social integration of refugees through the increased participation, consultation, and mobilization of local organizations. Whilst on placement at START, this was clearly appreciated by the service users, for example at the women's group, shown in 4.10i. Another time START joined with a company named Playback Theater, 4.10e. This group focused on the asylum seekers and refugees' emotions and experiences. By discussing their past and planning their futures, they were encouraged by the organization to build a life for themselves in Plymouth. This provides an opportunity for asylum seekers and refugees to create social networks and to support each other in an environment which is new to them. Although service users do focus on integration, this mostly includes encouraging asylum seeker and refugee communities to form social support networks amongst themselves, rather than integrating with the local Plymouth population. For there to be a strong move towards full integration into Plymouth's community, the social activities run by the service users should be opened up to the general public too. If Plymouth's locals and Plymouth's asylum seekers and refugees were to spend time together in a safe, secure, supervised environment, Not only would social networks broaden, but it may also reduce the hostility between the groups. As asylum seekers within the UK are not allowed to work, the events and activities organised by the service providers gives them something to do, keeps them occupied whilst they are waiting for the decision. For example, activities such as the Allotment Project, 4.10e. Ekberg, 1998, has studied migrants in Sweden. In his report, he has suggested that asylum seekers may have lost valuable skills during the long waiting period for their refugee decision. By attending regular social activities, there is more chance that asylum seekers will gain in confidence, and by making conversation in English, improve their language skills for the workplace. This data has researched the three main objectives of this project: to research the urban geography of Plymouth, the variety of services within the city centre, and the help they provide for asylum seekers and refugees; to research when asylum seekers and refugees began to come into the city, creating a need for a service network; and lastly, to research integration of asylum seekers and refugees and the attitudes of the local population. It is important to take into account where this research has come from. The service providers I interviewed for this project work daily with asylum seekers and refugees and understand the lives they lead. In comparison with this, on occasion when an article is published in a local newspaper, its main aim is to sell papers. Therefore, the examples within this analysis from the Herald should be questioned and not taken as fact. Chapter 5 Conclusion. The aim and research questions for this dissertation are: to investigate how successful Plymouth Service Network has been in helping refugees and asylum seekers integrate into the community. When asylum seekers and refugees began to come into the city, creating a need for a service network; the urban geography of Plymouth, the variety of services within the city centre, and the help they provide for asylum seekers and refugees; to what extent of the integration of asylum seekers and refugees and the attitudes of the local population. Given the evidence presented in the results and the issues considered in the discussion of this dissertation, the principal findings of the research are: Chapter 6 Reference List AC, Audit Commission, 2000. Another country, implementing dispersal under the Immigration and Asylum Act 1999, London, Audit Commission. AFTAB, I 2005. The Spatial Form of Bangladeshi Community in London's East End, 5th International Space Syntax Symposium. Delft, pp 129-144. Albrecht, H. 2002. Fortress Europe, Controlling Illegal Immigration, European Journal of Crime, Criminal Law and Criminal Justice, Volume 10/1, 1-22. Arnott, M. and Pinson, H. 2005, The Education of Asylum Seeker and Refugee Children. A Study of Lee and School Values, Policies and Practices. Cambridge, UK, Faculty of Education, University of Cambridge. Asylum Aid 2010. The Asylum Process Made Simple, Asylum Aid, http://www.asylumaid.org.uk/ pages/ the _asylum_process_made_simple.html, access January 23, 10, Aqua 2010 Ordnance Survey Maps, Aqua, http://www.aqua3.com/ os-maps/ osmaps asp. Search equals OS and LTYP equals L and Airvoc equals 1 and CHK equals 3 and MyLock equals 1 and Move equals Enstrom equals Plymouth and My Area equals Devon and Madeira equals 0 and XNAME equals and LNAME equals and CT equals Devon and Buffer equals 11,000 and Mike's equals 247,840 and My equals 54,460 and Mix equals 247,840 and My equals 54,460 and size equals 750 and miscale equals 11,000. And S2X equals 6 and S2Y equals 7. Access January 20, 10, Bailey, a 2005 Making Population Geography, Oxford University Press, London. Bennett, K., Heath, T., and Jeffries, R. 2007 Asylum Statistics United Kingdom 2006, Home Office, London. http://www.homeoffice.gov.uk/ rds/ pdfso7/ hosb1407.pdf, access December 1, 2010, Block A 2008 Migrants and Asylum Seekers. Inalock, P. May, M. and Rollinson, K. eds. The Student's Companion to Social Policy, 3rd ed. Blackwell Publishing, Oxford, page 410 to 418. Boswell, C. 2001. Spreading the Costs of Asylum Seekers, A Critical Assessment of Dispersal Policies in Germany and the UK, Anglo-German Foundation for the Study of Industrial Society, York, pages 1. Burnett, A. and Peel, M. 2001. Asylum Seekers and Refugees in Britain, What Brings Asylum Seekers to the United Kingdom. BMJ, 322 485 to 488. Cloak, P. Cook, I. Krang, P. Goodwin, M. Painter, J. and Philo, C. 2004. Practicing Human Geography, Sage Publications, London. Cohen, R. 1994. Frontiers of Identity, The British and the Others, Longman, Essex, pages 69 to 98. Cook, Ian Krang, M. 1995, Doing Ethnographies, Concepts and Techniques in Modern Geography. 58, Environmental Publications, Norwich. Cook, I. 2005, Participant Observation. In Flowered, R. and Martin, D. Methods in Human Geography, Pearson, Essex. Cunliffe, A. and Beharani, D. 2006. Resettled Refugees, Transition and Employment Prospects in Plymouth and the Southwest UK, Refugee Survey Quarterly, 25, 2, 123 to 134. DCC. Devon County Council, 2009. Devon Facts and S. 2001 Census, Devon County Council, http://www.devon.gov.uk/dris/ census/ population.html, accessed October 20, 2009, Doyle, M. 2003. Behind the Headlines, SCCD News, Summer 2003. 8-10. Ekberg, J. 1998. Immigration and the Public Sector, Income Effects for the Native Population in Sweden, Center of Labor Market Policy Research. Gamala Dinashami, M. Cooper, L. and Knight, B. 2002. Refugee Settlement, Can Communities Cope? London, Evelyn Oldfield Unit. Glover, S. Gott, C. Loiselin, A. Ports, J. Price, R. Spencer, S. Srinivasan, V. and Willis, C. 2001. Migration, an Economic and Social Analysis. UK, Home Office, Research and Development Statistics. Occasional Paper Number 67. Google 2010. Google Maps UK, Google, http://maps.google.co.uk/. Maps? HL equals N and Resnum equals 0 and Q equals Plymouth and equals 1 and E equals UTF-8 and Headquarters equals N near equals Plymouth, plus Devon and GL equals UK and A equals KPHHSGVKTG6JAFOFG6 DA and SAW equals X and OI equals G. Code result in CT equals image and Resnum equals 1 and VET equals OCAOQ8GWA. Accessed February 20, 10, Griffiths, D. Sicona, N. and Zetter, R. 2005. Refugee Community Organizations and Dispersal Networks, Resources and Social Capital, The Policy Press, Bristol, pages 218. Griffiths, D. Sicona, N. and Zetter, R. 2006. Integrative Paradigms, Marginal Reality, Refugee Community Organizations and Dispersal in Britain, Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies, 32, 5881. 898. Guardian 2010. AZ of Legislation, Guardian News and Media Limited, http://www.guardian.co.uk/ Commentas free/ series/ A-C-OF- legislation, accessed December 1, 2010, Hammersley, M. 1998. Reading Ethnographic Research, 2nd ed. Longman Limited, Essex Hayter, T. 2001. Open Borders, The Case Against Immigration Controls, Critical Social Policy, 21. 544. Healy, R. 2006. Asylum Seekers and Refugees, A Structuration Theory Analysis of Their Experiences in the UK, Population. Space Place, 12, 257-271. Herbert, S. 2000, for Ethnography, Progress in Human Geography, 24, 550-68. Hieronymi, O. 2008. Refugee Children and Their Future, Refugee Survey Quarterly, 27, 4, 6, pages 12. Home Office 2004 Community Cohesion Pathfinder Program, London and South Pathfinder Consortium, http://www.communities.gov.uk/ document/ communities/ pdf/ pathfinderlondon.pdf, access July 1, 10, Hopkins, G. 2006 Somali Community Organizations in London and Toronto, Collaboration and Effectiveness, Journal of Refugee Studies Volume 19, Number 3, 363-380 Hinman, J. 1999. A Post-Cold War Geography of Forced Migration in Kenya and Somalia, Professional Geographer, 51, 1, 104-114 ICAR, Information Center about Asylum and Refugees, 2009. Key Statistics about Asylum Seeker Applications in the UK, ICAR Statistics Paper 1, 1-20. http://www.icar.org.uk/ 9556/ statistics/ analysis-of-asylum-and-refugee-statistics.html, access January 20, 10, Johnson, R.J., Gregory, D., Pratt, Jean Watts, M., eds. 2000. The Dictionary of Human Geography, Blackwell, Oxford, pages 746. Jones, E. and Ailes, J. 1977. An Introduction to Social Geography, Oxford University Press, Oxford. Knight, B., Chigudu, H. and Tandon, R. 2002, Reviving Democracy, Citizens at the Heart of Governance, London, Erskine for the Commonwealth Foundation. Corrick, M. 2003. Integration and How We Facilitate It, A Comparative Study of the Settlement Experiences of Refugees in Italy and the Netherlands, Sociology Volume 37, 1, 51-68. Kumar, R. 2005, 2nd ed. Research Methodology, Sage Publications, London. Lauder, I. Hayes, J. Neckvable, J. and Turner Baker, J. 2008. Hostility Themes in Media, Community and Refugee Narratives, Discourse and Society, 19, 2, 187-221. Maidanapur, A. 2004. Marginal Public Spaces in European Cities, Journal of Urban Design, 9, 3, 267, 286. Mats D., Hilar, and Heath, T. 2001. Asylum Statistics United Kingdom 2000, Home Office, London, http://www.homeoffice.gov.uk/ RDS/ PDFs/ HOSB 1701.pdf, access December 1, 2010, McCarthy, L. and Cooper, B. 2009. Interaction at Local Level, A Case Study of Peterborough, UK. In Papademetrio, D., Zavos, A. and Cooper, B. eds. Models of Success, How the State and Civil Society Can Work Together to Integrate Immigrants, IMEPO, Athens, pp. 46-64. McDowell, L. 2003. Workers, Migrants, Aliens or Citizens. State Constructions and Discourses of Identity Among Post-War European Labour Migrants in Britain, Political Geography, 22, 863-886. Migration Policy Institute, MPI, 2010, United Kingdom, Annual Number of Asylum Applications 1980-2004, Migration Policy Institute, http://www.migrationinformation.org/ Data Hub / Country Data / Data.cfm, access December 1, 2010, OED Oxford English Dictionary 2007. Refugee, shorted Oxford English Dictionary. Phillimore, J. and Goodson, L. 2006. Problem or Opportunity? Asylum Seekers, Refugees, Employment and Social Exclusion in Deprived Urban Areas, Urban Studies, Volume 43, Number 10, 1715-1736. Philo, Jean Beatty, L. 1999, Race, Migration and Media, in G. Philo, ed. Message received, Glasgow Media Group Research 1993-1998, pages 171-96. Harlow, Longman. Thuong, C. 2003. Enlarging Fortress Europe EU Accession, Asylum, and Immigration in Candidate Countries, The International and Comparative Law Quarterly, Volume 52, Number 3, pages 641 to 663 Fuang, C. 2004 The International Protection of Internally Displaced People, University Press, Cambridge Refugee Council 1998 Asylum Statistics 1987 to 1997, London, Refugee Council. Refugee Council 2009 Government slashes support to asylum seekers awaiting a decision, Refugee Council Online, http://www.refugeecouncil.org.uk/ news/ 2009/ July/ 2009-0730, access January 29, 10, Robinson, v. 1995 The Changing Nature and European Perception of Europe's Refugee Problem, Jofram, 26, 4, 41 L427. Robinson, v. Anderson R. and Mustard, S. 2003, Spreading the Burden, The Policy Press, Bristol Sales, R. 2002 The Deserving and the Undeserving? Refugees, Asylum Seekers and Welfare in Britain, Critical Social Policy, 22. 456 Saraga, E. 2004 Who counts as a refugee? Personal Lives and the Shifting Boundaries of Citizenship. In Lewis, G. ed. Citizenship, Personal Lives and Social Policy, The Policy Press, Bristol, 121-161 Sim, D. and Bowes, A. 2007 Asylum Seekers in Scotland, The Accommodation of Diversity, Social Policy and Administration, 41, 7, 729-746 Spicer, N. 2008 Places of Exclusion and Inclusion, Asylum Seeker and Refugee Experiences of Neighbourhoods in the UK, Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies, 34, 3, 491, 510 Stevens, D. 2001 The Immigration and Asylum Act 1999. A Missed Opportunity. The Modern Law Review, 64, 3, 413 SWC, Southwest Councils 2009 Asylum Seekers and Refugees, Southwest Councils, http://www.councils.gov.uk/ incontent.cfm $?ID3143%TT=SWRA, accessed October 20, 2009, Temple, B. and Moran, R. 2005 Learning to Live Together, Developing Communities with Dispersed Refugee People Seeking Asylum, Joseph Rowntree Foundation, http://www.jrf.org.uk/ site/ file/ jrf/ 0085.pdf, accessed May 1, 10, UNHCR 1999 Serbia, Europe's Forgotten Refugees, Refugees Magazine, March 1, 1999, issue 114, http://www.unhcr.org/ 3b812e166.html, access January 23, 10, UNHCR United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, 2008, reporting asylum and refugee issues, UNHCR, http://www.unhcr.org.uk/ press/ reporting/ guidance/ terminology.html illegal immigrant, accessed, November 15, 2009, UNHCR 2009 Asylum Levels and Trends in Industrialized Countries, Statistical Overview of Asylum Applications Lodged in Europe and Selected Non-European Countries, Country Data Sheets, UNHCR http://www.unhcr.org/ 4 Adepka 49.html, accessed December 1, 2010, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, 2010 Regional Operations Profile, Middle East and North Africa, UNHCR, http://www.unhcr.org/ pages/ 4a02db416.html, accessed December 1, 10, Valentine, G. 2001 Social Geographies, Space and Society, Pearson Education Limited, Essex Valentine, G. 2005, Tell me about using interviews as a research methodology. In and Flowered, R. and Martin, D. Methods in Human Geography, Pearson, Essex Vaughan, L. 2007. The Spatial Foundations of Community Construction, The Future of Pluralism in Britain's Multicultural Society, Global Built Environment Review, 6, 2, pages 3 to 17. White, A. 2002, Geographies of Asylum, Legal Knowledge and Legal Practices, Political Geography, 2-1, 1055, 1073. White, A. 2002, Organic Functionalism, Community and Place, Refugee Studies and the Geographical Constitution of Refugee Identities, Jofram, 33, 73-83. Wilkinson, R. 2001, The Wall Behind Which Refugees Can Shelter, Refugees, UNHCR, pages 3. Winder, R. 2005, Bloody Foreigners, The Story of Immigration to Britain, Abacus, Kent, page 52. Wren, K. 2007, Supporting Asylum Seekers and Refugees in Glasgow, The Role of Multi-Agency Networks, Journal of Refugee Studies, 23, 391-413. Zetter, R. and Pearl, M. 2000, The Minority Within the Minority, Refugee Community-Based Organizations in the UK and the Impact of Restrictionism on Asylum Seekers, Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies, 26-4, 675. 697. Chapter 8, Appendix 8.1. Placement Diary, June 7, 2009-24/07/09. Date Diary Entry. Themes, June 7, 2009. The first family I visited was during a meeting to fill in a number of forms as the family are leaving Plymouth for London. The family welcomed us warmly into the family home, including myself, who they had met today for the first time. This family of 8 are very involved within START, attending the organized events regularly. They play a large role within the organization and it seems they will be greatly missed once they move away. They have been in contact with many members of the START team closely. Recently the family has been granted refugee status after 7 years of being labeled as asylum seekers. During the visit they discussed their sad feelings about leaving Plymouth and the friends they have made. They seem to fit in well to the community. The children are getting on well at school and the parents talked fondly of their friendships with neighbors. Refugees migrating from Plymouth to London once receiving refugee status, socializing with other ASRs, integrating into the community. July 7, 2009. First, I was shown a video produced 2 months ago of some young children of START who were discussing their lives in Plymouth. Many of them said they thought that Plymouth was a welcoming place. They all seemed very happy here and saw Plymouth as home. When asked about the countries they had lived, some children said that they remembered leaving but avoided going into further detail. Next, I was shown a presentation about START. This gave him a deeper insight into the organization and the types of people they work with. START mainly focuses on helping refugees with housing once they have been granted status, as they are then evicted from their NAS housing. After that, I spent some time on the internet looking for a 4-bedroom house in a particular area within Plymouth. Unfortunately, I found nothing that would accept people that were on housing benefit, which covers most refugees. If a refugee decides to find accommodation through a private landlord, they have more choice over location. However, it may take longer than if the refugee opted for social housing. At midday, I went to supervise the Soft Creations group. This is a women's group. They usually spend 2 hours sewing. However, this week was named Taste of Cultures. One of the women prepared a national dish from Cameroon for about 14 other women from around the world. Although there are many nationalities mixed together in one room, you would not know. The women were all gossiping and eating together. They discussed everyday matters like the weather. They talked about accents and they also talked about the countries they come from. Some of the women live together in a shared house, and although they all have different mother tongues, they have become close friends through their English. There were 2 new Iranian women in the group. Other women talked with them. Another Iranian woman who had attended the group for a long time came over and tried to chat in Farsi, and an woman said she would prefer to talk in English. It seems that they enjoy using their English, even though they may struggle. We had a cake as it was one of the women's last day before leaving for London. The women were sad to see her go. This group was a close group and this woman's departure would be a great loss. After Soft Creations, I assisted a member of staff in 2 house visits. The first was to help a service user with reading her electricity meter and utility bills. The service user was panicked as she had been charged for a service she was not using, and the problem was sorted with a telephone call to the electrics company. After that we went to visit a single mom with 2 young children. She had just been offered a social housing property in the Union Street area. She was happy with the news. However, she was also concerned as her children would have to change schools and the flat was completely unfurnished. She had no money to furnish, so Start will look around for some second-hand furniture for her. Positive feelings towards Plymouth, sharing culture, socializing with other ASRs, integrating into the community services, providing help with cultural and language issues, vulnerable and destitute people. August 7, 2009. I spent the morning with Playback Theatre. This is a drama group who uses art, crafts and drama to tell stories of asylum seekers and refugees. There were 4 service users who turned up. The session started with a poem which talked of opening door to reveal new places and sights. The service users were then asked to use various materials to create a sculpture behind a door. The service users took about 30 minutes creating their sculptures, and afterwards the team discussed the service users' feelings and what they had included in the sculptures. They then used that information to act out the service user's story. One of the service users had created a sculpture that showed her dreams. She talked of her life for Plymouth. Everything she did was for her husband, for her brother, and for her father. The men in her life controlled her. She felt trapped. Now in Plymouth she has the chance to make decisions on her own and do what's best for her and her children. Other service users created a sculpture which showed a ladder in a garden. This represented reaching up towards the future. The ladder reached through the clouds to show troubles, and at the top of the ladder was the sun, representing the hope in their lives. The day started with a team meeting. I was welcomed into the Start team and another member of staff was leaving. Details of the trip were also discussed to take place on the 21st of July. I then went to the allotment project. We met 1 volunteer and 1 service user there. The service user came up to the allotment frequently during the week as well as on a Thursday. He is seeking asylum. During this time you are unable to work, so the allotment is a good place where the service users can keep busy. He also felt that the allotment was a successful project that he had been involved with. The allotment keeps the service users occupied and also offers them a chance to socialize with others. Together we fixed the fence to the lot, did some weeding, we watered the plants and also planted some new seeds. 2 other service users arrived at lunch and everyone ate together. We talked about the countries that the service users came from. Although they have been forced out of their country, they speak fondly of it. They talked about the city and the mountains. They talked about the differences and similarities of the food that was able to grow in their countries and in Britain. Later we talked about sport. It was a chance to describe new and popular sports of the different countries and share sports that we particularly enjoyed. The project finished at 2:00, so I returned to the Start office for the allocations meeting. All of the Start members met to discuss their particular case studies to make sure that Start is providing a good service, and if there are any issues all of the staff can discuss them together. In connection with PATH, another organization based in Plymouth working with vulnerable people. Socializing with other ASRs, keeping busy and entertained. October 7, 2009. This morning I shadowed 2 student staff members to a service user house. The service user was applying for furniture support and to receive food vouchers from the Red Cross. She happily welcomed us into her house and we discussed the new house that she will be moving into next week. She had a friend with her to assist with the translation. Once the forms were understood and signed, the service user offered us a drink and we stayed for a while. She was excited to move into her new house. We talked about fashion and her children and languages. The service users often talk of the languages they speak, as it is usually more than just their mother tongue and English. After returning to the Start office, we met with the service user again for a viewing of the new flat. Everyone was anxious to see inside and the quality of the flat. Once inside, the service user seemed very happy. It was smaller than she thought, however it was in good condition and a very good location, with a park for her children to play in. Vulnerable and destitute people. Positive feelings towards Plymouth. July 13, 2009. I went to the house of her service user family to help as they were moving from Plymouth to London. They had packed up all of their belongings and were packing their things into a van. The entire family were helping move, and although it was a stressful day for them, they were welcoming and grateful for the support of the START team. It was obvious that the children were sad to leave Plymouth. They have settled in well here. However, there was also an excitement of going somewhere new. The boys were doing all of the heavy lifting whilst the women were organizing the important things from the not important. The father was extremely apologetic that he was unable to offer us any refreshments. He said that it is embarrassing in his culture for someone to enter your home without being fed. Once the van was full, remaining items were brought to START and they will be driven up to London at a later date. In the afternoon, I sat in with a member of staff as she was closing a service user's case. They discussed the service that START had provided for him and his current situation. The service user was concerned about having his case closed. START provides some security and a familiar face for service users to come to when they have a problem of any sort. This service user was very happy in his private house that START staff had found for him, and currently he had no immediate issues that he needed help with, so his case closes. The member of staff made it very clear to the service users that although his case was closed, it could be reopened at any time he wanted, and he was welcome to drop into the START office with any queries. This service user was extremely happy with the service that START had provided, and this was shown through his evaluation questionnaire. Cultural differences. July 14, 2009. Today I spent the morning in the office researching citizenship papers, trying to find how the applicant proves themselves to be suitable for British citizenship. At 12:30 I collected a service user from the city centre to show her the location of Soft Creations. The service user is from Iran. She chatted about the history of Iran and that she was coming to the women's sewing group to meet new people and make friends. This week we made cards which we plan to sell at the Respect Festival in August. This week there were half as many women present than the week before. However, everyone got involved, but many broke off into groups of their own nationalities chatting in their languages. This often isolates those who are the only person who speaks their language. We also discussed next week's trip with the women. There will be a trip which the women had requested as a change to the usual sewing activities they do. START agreed to pay for the ferry fares, however the women must meet us at the ferry port paying for their own bus fare. Many of the women were unhappy with this arrangement and only one woman agreed to attend the trip next week. Maybe it will be called off. After returning to the office, I assisted a service user in filling out an application form for the West Country Housing Association. Vulnerable and insecure people, Plymouth Services, providing support. Positive feelings towards the service providers. 15/07/09 in the morning I went with a member of staff to service user's new flat. Other members of the START team were already there and had arrived with a carload of furniture that had been donated by the church. We carried the things into the new flat and a member of staff and I went to the service user's current accommodation to fill the car. She had hired a van and there were 3 friends of hers helping her with the heavy lifting. We filled the car and met the van at the new flat. We spent the whole morning taking all of her belongings up 3 flights of stairs to her new flat. At lunchtime another member of staff arrived and the service user cooked a meal for us. We arranged some change of address details over the phone and left her to settle into her new property. Next I went with a member of staff to visit another service user who had problems with damp in her kitchen. Once we started talking to her, she asked us to look at her electric and gas bills, so we made a call to try to get her some help with paying the bills. This service user is going to be a computing student in September. After that we returned to the office for a meeting with Refugee Action. Then we packed up another van of belongings to send to London for a service user family. Cultural differences. Language issues. July 16, 2009. First thing I went to get some supplies for the allotment projects. This morning it was pouring with rain, so we were not expecting many volunteers there today. At 9:30 this morning we had a staff meeting to discuss any topics that had come up. We talked about the cancelled trip next Tuesday from lack of interest from the women in the sewing group. We also talked about the meeting held with Refugee Action on Wednesday and said goodbye to a student on placement at START. After the meeting I went with a member of staff to the allotment project. There were not many volunteers at the allotment today, as predicted, just the same 2 that attend regularly. We watered the plants inside the polytunnel, we planted new plants, red currants and blackberry bush, and one volunteer organized the START shed, hanging all of the equipment up on the walls. After the allotment project I returned to the office. I started doing some work on the computer designing the certificate that will be given out to the volunteers after they have completed a certain number of hours at START projects. Late in the afternoon a woman arrived who had previously volunteered at the allotment project and who I had taken to the soft creations meeting on Tuesday. She is very new to Plymouth, so I was a familiar face when she walked into the office. She asked to talk to someone about being assigned a caseworker. Although this woman is an asylum seeker awaiting her refugee status decision, START will work with her. Although START mainly works with refugees who have received status, this is the work that they are funded for. However, they also have contacts and can make life, especially the integration of migrants into communities, easier for those who want help. The woman discussed her past with us in broken English. As the language barrier was such an issue with this service user, it was not always clear what she was saying. She did make it very clear to us that she wasn't happy in their NASA accommodation and that she would like to be moved to another house. This is not an easy thing to do for asylum seekers unless there are serious issues that have been reported to the police, for example. The service user had only been in Plymouth for a number of weeks. She felt very alone, and suffering of her past have led to severe mental health issues which may make her eligible for a move. This woman left a large house and family in her home country through fear of being persecuted, and she is looking for friendship and comfort in a world that is new to her. Vulnerable and destitute people in need of help. Negative feelings, hostility, cultural issues. July 17, 2009. This morning I accompanied a service user to home A9AYTZ. She had been given a £200 voucher by the council to decorate her new property. There were many restrictions under the conditions of the voucher, so I went along to ensure that everything ran smoothly. The service user also brought a friend along to help with translation, as she lacks confidence when using English. There was a little struggle when discussing the types of paint that she wanted, however we managed to collect everything that she wanted and spent all of the money on her vouchers. I helped then take the supplies back to the service user's flat and started helping stripping wallpaper from the living room walls. Then the service user invited me to stay for some lunch and tea, and then I returned to the office. I then met with a member of staff for supervision to discuss how things had progressed over my second week and talk my experience here. Hostility, no change given, and cashiers are confused when faced with refugee vouchers. July 20, 2009. In the morning I met a service user in town at 8 a.m. Together we got on the bus and went to a hospital where she had an appointment with a doctor. On the bus she was discussing her life in Iran. She talked about how the country was good, the people were very friendly, but it was the government that were the problem. They were corrupt, they dictated what everyone should do and say within the country. She also discussed her family life in Iran, where she lived with her mother and father. When talking of her mother she got very upset. She spoke to her last week, but calls are expensive and so she can only talk for a short time. At the hospital she was asked about her past, so again she came out very upset from the memories that she had just relived. On the way back she discussed how she was treated by others in Plymouth, about the house that she shared and other women in it. She had some issues with one of the housemates about things such as an open or closed window. She was so fed up and irritated that this issue had really upset her and she wanted to move house. On return to the office I had to take a long lunch break, as it was hard to hear that someone is having such a hard time and there is nothing you can do about it. Asylum seekers have little leeway on things such as housing and joining collage courses such as this service user wished to do. Later the same service user had another appointment at the hospital, so I accompanied her again. This time she was more positive. She talked about her life before in Iran. She worked as a journalist in the capital city. She talked of how the government were trying to stop all of the newspapers and magazines from publishing and that it was a very dangerous job to have in Iran, but she missed it now. She was always very busy and had a lot of deadlines to meet. She spent the morning meeting people and taking interviews, and she would have to produce an article by 2 p.m. in the afternoon. She also asked about my family. When mentioning divorce she said in her country the women put up with bad husbands for the sake of the children. Divorce is very uncommon in Iran, unlike the UK. She said that she was engaged in Iran but her husband was arrested. After her second appointment the service user was a lot more cheerful. She had seen a mental health specialist. There was also a translator there so she could speak without the language barrier being an issue as it was with us. She said that although it was difficult to talk about the past, the therapist was very nice. The service user said that she had met some people in England that were nice, but it was difficult as she felt that some people she had met were not open to asylum seekers and refugees. She talked of an experience that she had on a bus in Plymouth city centre where a black woman had got onto the bus. Some young boys had started to shout horrible things at her. The service user said she went home and cried as she felt so unwelcome in Plymouth. Hostility for Plymouth's population and other ASR's cultural differences. July 21, 2009. Today I helped draft a letter for an asylum seeker who was applying to move house due to issues with her current landlord. As many of the members of staff at START are students on placement from abroad, I was asked to write the letter from their notes. This was the third letter sent to NAS about this case, and it was proving difficult to persuade them that this family's story was true as the landlord was arguing differently. In the afternoon I went to the sewing group Soft Creations where there were not many women this week. We did some sewing and the older women were teaching the younger women how to knit. They discussed clothes and fashion and the differences between countries. July 22, 2009. Today a member of staff and I reorganized the office, sorting files of existing and previous service users, as it is often the case that service users won't need START's help for a number of months before returning into the office, so the files must be saved for 3 years. Another member of staff and I went to the location that Soft Creations and Cultural Kitchen is held and organized the Arts and Crafts office, making a list of new supplies needed and ensuring that the room could be easily accessed. July 23, 2009. This morning we had a staff meeting, which I took the minutes for. We discussed the poor numbers of people turning up for the allotment project and how this could be improved. There were a few members of staff leaving this week, so we discussed whether all our work was finished and we made plans for the cultural kitchen tomorrow. Once the meeting was over I went to the allotment. It was good weather this week and many of the crops were ready to pick. Only one service user turned up and there were 3 members of staff. The atmosphere was great as the allotment had produced so many vegetables which we would be able to serve at Cultural Kitchen. We discussed what vegetables could be grown in Iran, vocabulary and places to visit in Plymouth. Socializing positive feeling towards Plymouth. July 24, 2009. Today was a busy day. I ensured that all of the filling that I have been given had been completed and the certificates were completed and presented well on a board to show this evening. Then 4 members of staff went to set up for Cultural Kitchen. This involved setting up tables, preparing food and setting up an arts and crafts activity for the service users. Everyone started to arrive at 3:30 and there were soon over 50 service users. There is a vast ranges of ages and nationalities all mixed together in one room. I sat with a group of children involved with the art activity. They talked about school and TV programs. The children seem very integrated into Plymouth life through school and they often have more advanced English than their parents. The evening was very successful and at the end of the evening everyone stays to help tidy up. The service users I have been working with knew it was my last day and all signed a card for me. I was surprised that I managed to build close relationships with the service users as quickly as I did. Socializing with other asylum seekers and refugees, integration into communities. Children. 8.2 Local Plymouth newspaper articles 1999 to 2009 newspaper date PG. Headline themes Evening Herald April 12, 1999 2 City prepares for Refugees Dispersal Act Anticipation of ASR Arrival Evening Herald January 26, 2007 4,000 homes for asylum seekers accepting/welcoming ASR arrivals Planning, interpreters, healthcare, education. Against ASR housing clustering Evening Herald January 2, 2002 Asylum FOR 300 Feet Scheme Dispersal Act, Warm Welcome, Planning, Anticipation Arrivals, Evening Herald September 13, 2007 Refugee Move is a disgrace against ASR coming to Plymouth Labour Leader welcomes ASR Evening Herald October 18, 2009 More refugees arrive in city. 164 AS move to Plymouth Evening Herald April 9, 2001 for concern over asylum plans racism concerns, following murder in Glasgow. Against ASR housing clustering fear of safety. Evening Herald February 8, 2001. 6 refugee homes are disgraceful, seeking better housing for ASR stopping private operations. Evening Herald July 6, 2002. 9 refugees in asylum protest upset over time spent waiting for a decision on refugee application. Western Morning News October 6, 2002. 7 hunger strike, refugees want end to lining hell, inhumane treatment. Evening Herald June 14, 2002. 9 Iraqi Kurds thanks to city upset over time spent waiting for a decision on refugee application, grateful for Plymouth support. Evening Herald June 18, 2002. 7 How a refugee sees Plymouth Refugee Week, a study of a refugee positive feelings towards Plymouth. Western Morning News April 9, 2002. 3 desperate refugees set sights on West Country, Devon and Dorset, gateway to Britain. Evening Herald January 22, 2003. 17 race hate mob attacks, Iraq refugees unprovoked attack on AS in Plymouth city centre, after a murder in Manchester. Evening Herald February 4, 2003. 15 fears as pair leave charity, ASR rely on the service providers within Plymouth city centre. Evening Herald July 25, 2003. 5 true picture on asylum and city destitution providing services. Evening Herald June 16, 2004. 6 video for city refugees integration, Refugee Week providing improved services. Evening Herald July 22, 2004. 17 city grants £40K to help refugees integration providing services, diversity in Plymouth. Evening Herald November 28, 2005. 18 growing project for city refugees integration, socializing with public, socializing with other ASR. The Herald October 15, 2007. 20 charity pleads for help for refugees, encouraging locals to volunteer, encouraging integration, welcoming refugees. The Herald January 17, 2009. 14 decade of help for the city's refugees providing services, negative perceptions of ASR Dispersal Act integration. 20 articles. 8.4 Interview with DCRSC 10/11/09. Liz Hardinge. During this interview only notes were taken rather than using a dictaphone to record, as the interview was taken in an open area with service users constantly walking through. A recording would have breached the confidentiality agreement. This also meant that the interview was broken as we were often interrupted. DCRSC began 10 years ago in 1999. The time of the Home Office's dispersal program to send asylum seekers to Plymouth. It all started with Sam Callum, who was born in Sierra Leone. He had worked with asylum seekers previously in Reading. He then moved to Devonport. Asylum seekers that had recently moved to Plymouth also lived in that area and noticed Sam around. Once they learned of his experience working with asylum seekers, then began turning up at his flat asking for help. Due to this, Sam sought some support and met and befriended a vicar from Estover. They found a Methodist church who gave them 2 rooms free of charge. One was used as an office and the other was used as a clothes store. The city council gave them £3,000 as setup costs. DCRSC remained there for 3 years until the church was sold. In 2003 they moved to Wimpole Street, which had previously been owned by Big Issue and was in a terrible state. They decorated. Over time, the Home Office sent more and more clients to Plymouth as they found it was a cheap area to house people. The count in August 2009 was 437 asylum seekers in Plymouth, not including refugees and failed asylum seekers. Initially it was churches that helped to create DCRSC and provided food and money. An Amnesty International group in Cornwall also donated, and gradually many other churches in Plymouth became involved. Finance. DCRSC approached charities. There is some support from the local council but not enough. They often have 70 people on one drop-in day. They work closely with NAS, the border agency and the Home Office. They mainly work with asylum seekers, as once a person has received refugee status there are other agencies to help. They help finding accommodation and sorting out finding national insurance numbers for refugees. There are 3 members of paid staff who deal mainly with casework, as they have qualifications from the Office of Immigration Service User, and there are over 40 other volunteers have 5 working per day. Confidentiality is important. There is a computer suite downstairs and the clothes store which are open on Mondays and Wednesdays. The service users also volunteer, as many come from rich families and are highly educated. There are staff from Nigeria and Eritrea who can speak many languages, so DCRSC really have to pay for an interpreter. Asylum seekers are located in the Green Bank, Mount Gould, Stonehouse and Mutney Plain area, so the office is in a central location. There is a fund to assist those struggling. DCRSC can offer a little money, but it's mostly food parcels and clothing that is available. There is a comfortable area which offers the asylum seekers a place to socialize as they find DCRSC a place of safety where help is given. It is difficult to comment on integration as service users are constantly coming and going, and once they have received refugee status they no longer require help. However, some do choose to stay in Plymouth. Although people and the media regard Plymouth and the Southwest as a racist area, the service users of DCRSC say that they feel safe and welcome in Plymouth. DCRSC offers them a certain amount of safety and they may feel less vulnerable in Plymouth rather than in large cities where they are wary of others that come from their countries of origin, as they may not be trustworthy. Certain cultural spatial areas have not built up in Plymouth. This is because once the asylum seekers have been granted refugee status, they often go into council housing where they have no choice over where they are located. On arrival at a port, a certain number of asylum seekers are sent to Cardiff where they are placed in temporary accommodation. There they are allocated a case holder, one person who is responsible for their application as a refugee. Then they are sent to a dispersal city, which is often Cardiff, Bristol or Plymouth. Plymouth is often chosen for its cheap accommodation, which is provided through Clear Springs. Now and again they have to travel to Cardiff to meet with their case holder. Depending on which city has space in NASA accommodation is where the asylum seekers are sent. Some funds are provided by Plymouth City Council, however the amount has to be shared between DCRSC, START and Refugee First. The council has created a consortium because it wants to communicate with just one body supporting refugees and asylum seekers in Plymouth. However, each of these organizations offer separate services, and while they do work together they are separate, independent organizations. There is one volunteer who organizes events such as playing football and going to the gym, and he lets the service users know when there are free events going on to keep them occupied. It is often the men that suffer from boredom as they are unable to work and have nothing to do. This gets bad press coverage. 8.5 Interview with PATH October 11, 2009. Jessica Palmer. Nick Reed. What is RHSS? RHSS is a service commissioned by Supporting People, which is a branch of the government, if you like, administered in the local council. They get a pot of money every year which comes through to the office in Midland House. They administer that and it pays for. It used to be called Transitional Housing Benefit a long time ago. Now it's become Supporting People, and it's lots of services that provide support to adults, and in the widest sense of the word, who are either living in hostels or need some elements of support in their lives to live a normal life, and in most cases it would be fair to say, they're moving, the idea being to get them back to independent living. Ultimately the service would then pull away and the person would go on living independently, so, put in the broadest sense, that's who SPR in the RHSS was one of the strands of their funding, and it was to provide a floating support to refugees and refugee families in Plymouth, as it was seen better to what's the word, to get, there's a word that I can think of, to get involved with refugees at the point where they're given status, a preventative approach really, to get involved with it and help move them forward into finding accommodation and integrating into society, rather than just to give them status and then push them out the door and then allowing them to sink or swim as it costs. The bottom line is it costs society, social services, etc. more money if you have to mop up the mess that can happen as a result of people not being able to cope, than if you intervene at the beginning and try to give them skills to, and advice and guidance to build and set up home for themselves, yes, in the area. So, it's a floating support service. What's the floating part? Well, to explain that, that's the floating bit is because it's not tied to an accommodation, it's not tied to like a hostel or the person's home. It's really a dynamic service that can go anywhere if you like. So it's people that can physically go and visit clients wherever they are located. So whether they're in their NASA accommodation, whether they're in their own flats or in temporary accommodation or B+BS or wherever, we can go to them. They come to us as well, but we're very flexible and we work with them on a regular basis in order to help them set up their new lives when they've been given status, because prior to that they don't have their accommodation there. Support network is provided by the government in a standard package through NAS support, which is managed by a housing association, and again it's a similar role but a less hands-on approach. Really they're kind of shipped down to the city and caught by somebody who then takes them to the accommodation, gives them the keys and tells them this is where you get your money each week and shows them the door, the very basics, and walks off really and leaves them and does very little more with them. It's a very hand-off approach really. Yeah, then they sit and wait for a letter hopefully saying you've been given refugee status, someone that could take however long. Yeah, there's no time scale on that actually. The current service they would like to do it within 6 months or so. I think they don't always manage that and the majority are refused. Of asylum seekers, the ones that get a positive decision are the ones that potentially become our clients. And how does that happen? So, that they're the first stop for refugees in most cities I think is what the government designates as a one-stop shop, which is Refugee Action in Plymouth. They will give them an interview to explain their options, and if they wish to stay in the city and they want help finding accommodation at that point they would be referred to us. Everyone who has come though the new race system since 2007 would have been pointed at us by Refugee Action. Now that's just one chunk of the work that comes to us, because also anybody who's come through any other route and gotten is a refugee and has problems with accommodation can also come to us either by themselves or through another agency. Through Midland House, through GPs. This could be anyone who stumbles upon a refugee who, if they know about us, who have issues with their accommodation, they can point them at us. Okay, how long have you been set up to help refugees in the city? Good question. Probably 2006ish. Okay, it will be 5 years in September 2011, so if we go backwards, yes, 2006. Okay, was that because there was a missing link? Yeah. There wasn't a service, there wasn't a coherent service that could intervene at the point where people got status to stop them from declaring themselves homeless or just going on the street or whatever. The government at that time was really big on street homelessness. They were really pushing it. It was Blair in full flow trying to say that there was nobody homeless in this country, that all the councils could cope and there was enough housing for everybody when society was flying relatively strongly economically, and there should have been on paper enough money, enough accommodation for everybody. It was inexcusable that vulnerable people were left without and support. So it was out of that politics that we were coming. Previously there had been a lot of hodgepodge, apart from Refugee Action, but most of their work is to do with asylum seekers, as that's the majority of people that are put into a given space. As once people have got status they can fly the coop, they can go anywhere. They are the ones that need more advice around their claims for asylum really. Yeah, do you have to compete for the funding that you get from supporting people? Potentially if we were to renew it we would have to go up against other service providers. At the time we did have to go up against Devon and Cornwall Housing Association, but we had a lot more experience as we got together with other agencies that help refugees and Path had housing skills, so together we kind of robbed home. Haha. Yeah, and got the bid easily, so there was nothing really in place before 2006. No, well, there was a kind of random hodgepodge of charities, Christian groups and things trying to fit the need, but not very organized, is a not very joined up way, and without the expertise in housing and support work before that. But Path had 10 years housing experience in that field, including refuges. They were a small part of its work and it still is, as Path has masses of arms. The refugees in one contract that is done with Start and we only have 2 members of staff that deal with refugees and we provide the drop-in service 2 days a week. Okay, and is that just to see you? Or do you offer a place to socialize or any use of computers? Well, they can see me anytime Monday to Friday 9 till 5, but during drop-in anyone can come and request the service, but it's primarily a time for new clients. Would they just come to you for housing issues, or if they have money issues or need food parcels would they come and speak to you? Yeah, I don't know. Once you have a client they come to you with any issues, but new clients tend to just come with housing issues, as that's all they've heard about us. Once you have a client they come to you about anything and you realize that house starts to include everything else as well as housing. You find yourself doing all sorts of other things. They often don't know how to get benefits and English lessons and how to get help, how to fill out travel documents. I either help them or let them know where they can go to get help. The list is massive. It's never ending really. Every week is different. Every day I'm like a directory of services. Really, the refugees have very few possessions. They haven't got so much baggage, so it makes things easier. Really, that's not always true, but in some cases it makes things quite straightforward when filling out forms. Yes, there's not past. There are no debts or mortgages or commitments. So once you have found accommodation, do you think that the refugees find it easy to integrate into Plymouth life? Do you have people come to you and say we want to move? Yeah, what I often say when I first meet people is that be aware that it is a small country town city. It's a country style. Yes, this is not a big city. To put it in simple terms for them, the culture here is different. There's not a lot of work, but it has pluses and minuses. It's quite a good place to bring up children. It's nice countryside. The weather is as good as you're gonna get in England, so do warn that people looking for a countryside life rather than a big city. Yeah, it is. The culture here is slightly conservative in terms of racism. Sort of cultural mix is going to be less cosmopolitan than living in the city, so I make that plain to them. I say there is nothing wrong with staying for a while then moving. Do lots stay for a while and then move on to London? Or do they stay and settle? Most do tend to settle if they have decided to stay. As far as I can tell, it's important to get that across. Are there any areas of Plymouth that certain cultures have set up in? Are there any mini ghettos? Yeah, there is that happening. It's the Kurdish community that is the biggest. I don't know the S. As far as I know, anecdotally the Chinese is the biggest, but not so visibly, and the Kurdish community is the second biggest. The is more noticeable in Plymouth. Most people would notice they're here in a big way. They have quite a few big events and they have had an impact on the city. And the city had responded to that in a positive way, such as providing money for services and events and things. Or beyond that, there are also quite a lot of Congolese and Sudanese. There's an Africa House organization, but it doesn't have a geographical location. The communities are spread. Do you think that makes it easier in Plymouth? If the cultures are spread out, it's not so noticeable. Yes, well, I think there are probable pockets. But I couldn't tell you where they are really. I think King Street. In terms of the street, there seem to be a lot of Kurdish there. There is a Kurdish restaurant, yes there is, and a halal butcher around the corner, and there is a lot of visible Kurdish people on the street. I expect a lot of them are living in the council housing around there. That's a bit of a community center, and it has been a bit of a flashpoint at times as well. And beyond that, there isn't anywhere else I could say is visible. However much you believe in multiculturalism and diversity, it's an idea that one strives towards, and people's instincts seem to pull them in the other directions. The language and common culture pulls people together. Even when you encourage them to mix, they do resist it. But Plymouth is going in the right direction in terms of multiculturalism, and the university has had a big impact in terms of Plymouth because of foreign students. In terms of the multiculturalism, plus the economic migrants and a lot of foreign workers are coming into the city. I think some of the local might not understand what the group is made up of and just call everybody an asylum seeker through prejudice, and they're probably the smallest of the group. Hopefully over time they will learn that that's not the case. What about the local press? Is there quite positive press or is it negative? I'm not sure. I don't really follow the local papers, but I think there have been some companies for people being deported, but I'm not sure. 26 minutes 8.6 Interview with Refugee Action November 16, 2009 Jessica Palmer Jane Robinson. So, when did Refugee Action start and when did this office open in Plymouth? Well, Refugee Action started in 1981, and it's a national charity, and it's similar to Refugee Council, which most people have heard of more than us. But in the early days of Refugee Action there was a lot of advice and community management, but I think the major group of concern in the early days were the Vietnamese boat people, so it was a much smaller organization then, and they worked directly with communities and integration. Later on, around 1990, with the conflict in the Balkans, they ran the Bosnian program resettling people, and then the major this was the Kosovan program in 1999, and some of our colleagues still work on that program. They have continued with the organizations, but the major change came in 2001 as there had been pressure on the government and there were more and more asylum seekers, and many ended up in Dover or Heathrow or in the southeast. That's when they brought in the policy of dispersal, where they put asylum seekers round the country to places like Plymouth, which had never, well actually there were some that had got here somehow. It was to do with the cities that agreed to do it, but the council at the time in Plymouth was pretty inward looking and they couldn't get their heads around the plan. So what happened was NAS contracted with accommodation providers and they just sort of said, we will house asylum seekers in the city. So there was no preparation, no forward planning of services, education or social services. They just brought asylum seekers here, and there has been regular asylum seekers dispersed here ever since. They have no choice. Many want to go to London, but it's you have to go where we send you. The biggest group in Plymouth is Kurdish Iraqis. So about 2001 the office here opened? No, it didn't start to 2002. First it was set up in Exeter, but that wasn't where the asylum seekers were, and very soon they relocated to Plymouth. So 2002. Okay, what services do you provide for ASR? Do you work with both equally? Well no, we have the one-stop shop to work with AS. Since last October we started the RISE service. Refugee Integration and Employment Service, which is to work with our but only new ones that have come through the new asylum model, NAM. We plug the gaps, we advocate for people. Although they get somewhere to live and a very small amount of money, there is a lot of advocating for things that they should just be getting. There are gaps in money, and if someone's claim fails they will have no money and nowhere to live, so we can try to get them support in different ways. If they fit into a certain category, we can make a claim for their case to be opened again. So there is a lot of destitution, which is may not be that many living on the streets, although that does happen. It's often people living in a house with other asylum seekers with little money in the first place, sleeping on the sofa and them having to share their food. You know, a small amount. A lot of work we do because people have been here a long time and may be traumatized in the first place, but the way they have been treated here uncertainly and the fact that they can't work. A lot of mental health problems. Early on it was recognized by the health service that there were mental health problems. They are a dedicated team that work with asylum seekers. Is that through the NHS? Yeah, they have been created as a specialist team. They are a fantastic resource. They often have the same clients as us, and because of that we can use that information to get support from social services. So there are lots of interlinking things like that. Do you work with a lot of the other services in Plymouth? Yeah, we work as lot with DCRSC, not just because they are all around the corner, but we have a lot of clients in common with them. They are a bit more like a community center. We have clients come in and then go out again. We advocate for social services as laws have got stricter, and with Path and Start we do a lot with refugees as they have a contract to help refugees with housing, and we have someone to help with finding work. And do you put on any events for ASR? We do some training. At one point we had funding for a refugee awareness worker that went out and gave presentations within schools and to anyone who asked. The negative side is prejudices, but people are very interested in what's going on, so we used to do a lot of that. There is a lot of other stuff to do. Is there much opportunity to integrate, or do you think that once people have got status they move away? Good point. I don't think we have tracked it enough. I think a lot do go for obvious reasons. If they have family living somewhere else that they want to be near them, and what's been said about families that have been here a long time and they get status, a lot of them do stay partly because they have children in schools here. You have probably heard this before, but a lot of ASR are very well educated, so they want their kids to do well, so they wouldn't necessarily move them. Has there been any hostility? Not recently, but in 2005 there was an appalling case in a school in Devonport where a gang of white children ganged up on an asylum seeker. It was a big issue. It was very unpleasant. I can't say as I don't work out there, but generally I think things have been okay, not too bad. Are there areas in Plymouth where AS are placed? Oh yes, there are. Most of the areas are mainly Greenbank, Malty and some round Caham, as a lot of the north of Plymouth is council estates, and so the council always said they would never place asylum seekers in council housing. That was a problem of dispersal in the early stages due to this. Companies like Clear Springs have properties they have leased which has been in private rented areas, Boltmont Road Saywell, which is a bit further out towards Mount Gould, but people that have become refugees have been offered council houses, and I think that there have been issues there as the communities are not that friendly. Where does the funding come from for Refugee Action UKBA? The funding comes from the border agency. That's for our mainstream work, as our work is seen as things they do, but we do advocate for asylum seekers and refugees against the border agency. How do the asylum seekers get here from arrival? A lot of people come overland and pay people smugglers as they need someone who knows the routes. At the moment we are getting a lot of Afghanistanis across land. Some people do fly in Plymouth. There are a lot of Eritreans. Depending where they enter the country, they may be put in very temporary accommodation in London and then they will be dispersed to different bits. The people we get have been dispersed to Cardiff where there is a short-term hostel. How long would they have been there? Not very long, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, then they're dispersed either here, Bristol, Swansea, or sometimes Cardiff city centre. So it's all sporadic. In Cardiff they have an induction and health screening and then they are sent here or other places. How many people do you get using your services each day? Well, we can't always see everyone who comes, but maybe 20 people each drop in, but we also do appointments and we do phone advice. Also an important thing is that if someone doesn't speak English we always get an interpreter, which I think we are the only agencies who do that. That's what we guarantee to do. A lot is done on the phone with the refugee integration work. We have to see them after 7 days after they have been notified, so sometimes we have to move things around to see them. Okay, 18 minutes. 8.7 Interview with START November 18, 2009. Jessica Palmer, Susie Dent. My first question is, when did START first open? My understanding is, but you should check this, but I believe it started in 2001. I think it started with 3 students on placement, and they might have had space at the Civic Center and set it up as an organization. And how often are you open? We are open 9 till 5 Monday to Friday, apart from a cultural kitchen day when the office is still open until 5, but the cultural kitchen runs until 8:30 or 9. Do you know how many people come to the cultural kitchen? It is very hugely. There are set amounts as well for fire safety. When it's completely choco-block, we have had over 100 on a quiet kitchen. Sometimes it's about 20. Okay, so it varies from week to week. Often it's around 40, 50, 60 mark. What about cases? How many of those do you have? Currently at start we have our HSS, which is funded through supporting people, which I have here, so I can probably give you an exact number at the moment. Through our HSS contract, start has 27 cases and Pat's carrying 10, so total number is 37 cases. But sometimes we have more cases than others as we roughly follow the academic term, so we have less cases over the summer months, then it evens out over the years. We also work with people that we are not funded for, and those are called start cases as we have no funding for them, and currently we've got 8 cases, so that's for those still in the asylum process that can't be in the RHSS contract, but we would not work with them, so that's what forms them. Okay, so are you open to house visits, or are you situated in your office and the service users come to you? Start was always set up to be an at-home service to work in people's home environment. Sometimes that's not appropriate. For example, if a person is sofa serving, they are staying with friends, or maybe they don't want you to visit, they are staying somewhere where they don't want you to come, then we will meet people in the office. But as a general rule, we would much rather do home visits as it's probably more relaxed and you have a better reaction. You want to have a conversation in a place that reflects the truth of people's circumstances. If you're sitting in someone's front room, was start open because there was a gap in the agencies in Plymouth, was something needed to fill or make a link? Yes, what start isn't is a statutory service. We are only in Plymouth. This is it. There's nothing else, and what we're not trying to do is replicate those statutory services. Those services are there and they exist. We're not trying to copy them or do the same work as them. How I see start is filling the gaps between the services. So sometimes people do need to access social services, health services, and mainstream services. So where people need that, we would encourage them to do that, but there are lots of huge gaps in the services. Where I see it is when people are completely supported by UKBA is by the Home Office and then have to access mainstream services, things like the job center or housing benefit, and that space in between the two services don't meet up very well. They are completely separate. Start fills those gaps well. And do you work closely with other agencies in Plymouth? Yes, we do. We work very closely with all agencies. We refer into them, they refer into us, and there is also a consortium of organizations that we belong to, which is at trustee level. Do you benefit from that? Yes, it's about sharing information, also looking at funding and joint funding bids, working coherently with other agencies, and also if there are things that need to be looked at with, I don't know, the housing, to have that in a consortium gives it much more weight. Do you find you have to compete with other agencies for funding? Funding is an enormous issue at the moment. I think that for all agencies in whatever sector, for any third sector organization, and RAs probably are not at the top for funding, as it's a very political area. There is a lot of rhetoric about defending borders and all of that stuff out there, which I don't suppose makes it any easier. When START was set up, they had quite a sizable amount from the National Lottery. Then they had our HSS contract, which now is the main source of funding, which will extend for 2 more years. We are applying to lots of different charities, but it's a very competitive world now, but we are competing against everything. Do you offer advice in all areas of things for the service users, or do you just focus on housing? Although our HSS is our main funding, we are very clear that we try to look at people holistically, so the every child matters. Things like staying safe and having housing and having enough money, it's all those bits. We can't just look at housing, as you have to look at all the other bits, like are there support networks, have you got friends, are you well, do you need medical services? So when we meet people, we go through all of those things when we first meet someone to look at the holistically. Do you provide any goods or food or drink for service users? There are some agencies within the city that do that. For example, DCRSC and Red Cross have extremely good food programs, and we refer into them all the time. We don't offer that ourselves. We will help if they are really destitute, but that is only a small amount of money. We don't try and do everything for everyone, as there are some things that we can't do and other agencies can. Things like the food program, we have a very good relationship with them, so we can refer clients to them. Okay, is there an opportunity for service users to socialize here? Yes, the social inclusion and social interaction is a key aspect. If you are really isolated, it's hard. We look at that in casework to see if there are specific things that people want to do. If they want to join a group, we try to facilitate that. Then as an agency, we run a cultural kitchen on alternate Fridays and an allotment project on a Thursday and a women's only sewing group on a Tuesday, and all of those are about the activities a bit, but it's also about meeting and talking and about making friends and to network. Okay, and also it's about service users taking the lead. People take the lead of the activity. It should all be done collaboratively. The allotment when I first started here was used a lot by asylum-seeking women to grow food for their families. By now it's used by 4 or 5 men who use it as a space to come and talk as much as anything else. And are there any areas of Plymouth that have developed into small ghetto areas, or is it not like that, or the houses mixed in so you would know where ASR are living? Asylum properties tend to be because it's landlords which have contracts with clear springs and that tend to be in areas of cheaper housing. They tend to be central areas like Caham and Cattle Down. Sometimes mightily when people get status they can then access the private market, and people doing that like to be near the city center. Often they can't drive, so they want to be somewhere that's walkable. If people are going through social housing, if you go through homelessness route, people can bid on areas that they feel are more appropriate, and people do tend to be in a central area. There are areas where a number of hate crimes have been reported. If people say that they have been offered housing in an area that we think maybe there have been a lot of racist incidents, we will speak to the police to see if they know about a lot of hate crime in that area. Okay, it is difficult as you can never judge your neighbors, that's right, and it's hard to say really. I think that some of the older, more established housing estates on the edge of Plymouth that are predominantly white are trickier for service users, and some of the more central areas of Plymouth that perhaps have a greater BMG community. But Plymouth City Council will be very keen not to have ghettos or no-go areas. I think that would be pretty central to their housing policy. And do you think there is much chance for integration into Plymouth? Do you find that refugees stay and they are happy living here? Yeah, again it's very variable. Most people who come want to work above housing. Their main goal is that they want to work, and work currently in Plymouth is very difficult. It's difficult all over, but there are a lot of people have a sense that Plymouth is harder than other areas, but I don't know if that's true or not. A lot of the industries like food factories that traditionally took on a lot of people through short-term contracts, and it was easy for people to get in. Often that's people's first job in a new country, have either closed or there aren't a lot down here. There's 1 or 2 in Cornwall, but not a lot of those kinds of industries, so some people will go because they can't find employment. A lot of people will stay, which is great, particularly families as they have children in schools. But again, some families will choose to go because for them their particular community is elsewhere. Maybe they want to join other family members somewhere else, or they want to join a religious community or an ethnic grouping. It's very variable. I've got no idea about the numbers really. A lot of people will stay, but a lot of people will go because they can't find work, so it varies between each individual case. Yes, it may be easier if you've been here for 10 years. You might be more established and have friends in the support network, and you're more likely to stay. Okay, do you think Plymouth is open to receiving ASR? Has there been any bad press? There is racism in Plymouth. There is racism in any city. I don't know statistically if it is worse in Plymouth than it is in any other city. You would have to ask the Racial Equality Council, and also some of that will be related to reporting. Some cities are better at reporting than others. Here we are a reporting center, and we would really encourage anybody who has any to come and report it to us, and we would report it to the council, and we support people accessing the police and court cases and anything else. Yeah, there is racism in Plymouth, and we work with families all the time who deal with I was yesterday right who do experience racism, and we would really encourage people to link in with other agencies at that point, particularly the Race Equality Council, because they are one of their main areas is looking at hate crime. And do the local police respond to this? Absolutely. I am working with 2 families at the moment who I have regular meetings with the Race Equality Council and the local police officers in the service users' own homes in different parts of the city. Okay, and so the council, are they welcoming to asylum seekers when they are dispersed here? Yes, Plymouth is a dispersal center with about 500 bed spaces, so there are a lot of people coming into the city. It depends on who you get. The policies and processes I'm sure are usually there. There is a social inclusion unit. Interpreters are available. I think there is a training issue. There's not an enormous BME community in the city. You do find sometimes that front desk workers at housing benefit or the job center to act in inappropriate ways, and if that was in a racist way we would certainly report them and recording them. So I think there is a training issue. So after 10 years of having the Dispersal Act, things must be settling down. Maybe you're not Maybe I think one would hope that in times of economic stress nationally, then racism comes to the foreground. Thank you for taking your time to listen to me. I hope you enjoyed learning about asylum seekers and refugees as much as I did. Kindly remember that you can get a custom, plagiarism-free essay at All A+ Essays for as little as $10. The link is in the description. See you next time.